Hi, this is Cathy Goodwin, and today we're going to look at a very specific career development strategy. What happens when you get laid off from your job or terminated when you have an agreement? Sometimes your agreement will allow you to use outplacement services, and sometimes you may get a lump sum to use for private coaching, or you may decide to pay for your own private coaching or supplement your outplacement services. And we're going to look at some of those options in this short video. First, when you're faced with a job search, which is pretty much what you're faced with after you've left one job for one reason or another, you have certain basic strategies. I don't like to say formulaic, but they're pretty common to almost any job search. First, networking, but networking with a purpose. Some consultants and some people will say, well, just get out there, talk to people, keep moving. I once got an email from someone who said he had been to 200 informational interviews. And he had a lot of good contacts, a lot of fun, but he really wasn't any closer to identifying specific places where he could get a job or a new career. 200 is a lot. I say that's too many. What he needs to do is be more purposeful. I mean, yes, when you're in the early stages, talk to anybody and everybody, but know what you're going to talk about and know when it's time to say, okay, I don't need to talk to everybody. There are times when you have to say yes to an opportunity for an informational interview or an encounter or a meeting, but that's, for example, if someone who's very valuable makes an opportunity open for you, maybe they make a special phone call and go out of their way to arrange something, you really have to do it. But for otherwise, really think these things through. Use your network to review your resume and get interview tips. In other words, your network is not just to give you ideas about jobs, but if you're looking in a specific field, in a specific industry, and you have an opportunity to meet with a hiring executive from that industry, say, would you mind, I'm not applying for a job, but I'd like to get your take on my resume. Is this the kind of thing that usually crosses your desk? What would make it stand out? What would set off red flags? That might be the opportunity to have your resume vetted by someone who knows what they're doing. Any career consultant, I don't care who they are, we really try to stay on top of things, but almost every industry has its own code, often unwritten, of what people look for in resumes and what people look for in interviews. And only someone in that industry, and not only in that industry, but in that industry hiring today, can give you guidelines. Stretch your limits. This is another strategy that a lot of people don't think of, but any responsible career coach or consultant will encourage you to expand your boundaries, because if you just say, I've got to have a particular type of job in one particular place, you may be able to get it. Some people are very, very focused. But whenever I hear someone saying, I'm banging out resumes, I've submitted out 500 resumes and nothing's happened, generally they haven't been willing to stretch their limits. So geography, sometimes you really cannot move. I mean, if your kid is on a hockey team that's coached by a professional player and that means everything to the kid, you may decide that it's not worth moving, that you may have to sacrifice your career. But on the other hand, you may never have thought about the fact that maybe there's another city where you're going to be more marketable. Right now, you may be working for a company that's the only game in town as far as your career field. And in that case, you have to either think about geography or think about some other options, such as self-employment. Self-employment is really a very important option to consider. I want to emphasize, you may decide you absolutely do not want to work for yourself. And believe it or not, I hear this a lot. I once had a client, and I'll disguise the details. She was living in a major city in a very high-profile job, and she was very publicly terminated. She did everything. She sent out resumes. She went to a resume blasting service, and I cringed when I heard that. She stayed home and cried. She did everything. And when she got to me, I said, well, why don't you think about being a consultant? Because you're very well known, you're respected in your field, and you're known in your area. You don't want to move. Why don't you try it? And she said, oh, no, there's no way I could do that. I am not the self-employed type. I love working for a company. I've never done anything else. But I persuaded her to go to a networking event, and she went to a women's group somewhere in the area, and I don't even know the name of the group. When she got there, she introduced herself, and of course everybody recognized her because she was high profile, and they loved her. They said, well, we're so happy to meet you. And she said, well, I'm thinking of starting a consulting firm. And they said, give me your card, I want to talk to you. So when she left the meeting, she came home and found all these messages on her answering machine of people who wanted to talk to her. Plus, someone at the group had leaked the word to a local neighborhood newspaper, and they said, X is thinking of starting a consulting business, and her phone rang off the hook even more. So a couple of years later, I heard from her, and she was just delighted. She loved what she was doing. She had a website, she had a business, and things were going better than she ever expected. Now, I'm not saying everyone turns out the same way. Not everyone has those opportunities, lives in a place where that's feasible or has that kind of background, but it certainly is a model to keep in mind as you explore what's out there. And finally, you may want to have a new industry. And this is not at all uncommon. You may need a new role, a new industry. And if you do that, you'll need to find out what's going on in that industry. For example, if you're a journalist wanting to go into public relations, that's a common move these days. And there are different ways you set up your resume. There are different ways that you answer interview questions and position yourself. Now, outplacement is becoming scarcer. If you work for a company back, 5-10 years ago, certainly 20 years ago, if you were terminated, laid off, even outright fired for misconduct or because you didn't fit in, you would be offered outplacement. And nowadays, fewer companies are offering outplacement, and they are offering really, the Wall Street Journal called it downsized versions of their services. And that means things like tighter time limits to look for a job. So where once you might have gotten 6 months or a year, now you might have 2 or 3 months. It's less personal. People are saying, instead of having someone give me one-to-one advice on, say, writing my LinkedIn profile, they're putting me in front of a video and saying, watch this video on how to do it. Now, I have to tell you that sometimes this will be even better, because sometimes a video will put you through something where you can stop it, you can pause it, you can go back and listen to it. It might be even more effective for what you're doing, but it will certainly feel less personal. And a lot of people do, in fact, report feeling like a number. They feel they're given cookie-cutter strategies. And I have to tell you, that can come with private consulting as well, but it seems to be more common with outplacement services these days. But what if you are offered outplacement? Well, I would not turn it down. I mean, sometimes you can negotiate to get private coaching or get a lump sum for private coaching instead. There are implications. Again, I'm not a tax advisor, but sometimes you might be taxed on the value of your outplacement, and you may be able to deduct from your taxes your career consultant. But again, I'm not touching that. I'm not a tax person. So find out what those implications are. And you may not be able to negotiate. Some people say, we've already got the contract with outplacement, go. If you do have to go, get the most out of it. Don't waste your time. First, use their training materials. You can make up your mind as to whether they're useful or not, but at least, read them, see what they've got. Use your one-on-one time wisely, because you won't get a lot of it. So think about what's most useful to you with that one-on-one time. Sometimes it'll be setting a strategy, but a lot of times, I have found that people find it's really helpful to use your one-on-one time to practice. So practice interviewing. Ask your consultant to play the part of the interviewer, to role play with you, so you can practice explaining yourself and promoting yourself during an interview. This is really one of the hardest challenges I find for most job seekers, especially those who have been working for an employer, who have been gainfully employed and successfully, and who have achieved success over a long period of time. They've lost the knack of interviewing, and it feels horrible. So the more you can practice and get feedback, even if your feedback isn't good, because you want to pick a strategy that no matter what the quality of your outplacement consultant, it will still be valuable to do this. It's like mic time. When you do open mic comedy, which I've done some of recently, the more you get mic time in front of a crowd, even if things go badly, even if you bomb, just that experience of being out there looking at a crowd with the lights and the mic in your hand makes you better. And it's the same with interviewing. The more practice, the more role playing you have, the better. I recommend not doing it with friends, with strangers. It's really very different. With friends, it doesn't have the same impact. And although it's better than absolutely zero, but get feedback, figure out what to do, and test your resume with your network. So use your outplacement for things they know about, get feedback, but ultimately test with your network. Now, private coaching gives you a different set of options. You have more options to stretch your time, which means you can budget differently. So if you have X dollars that you're willing